of that. So let's cover the content. I'm not too sure, who all have actually already seen some of the presentations, because we have made a number of presentations. So for some of you, it may sound a little bit repetitive, but that's fine. I'm going to cover the content in about 20 minutes and leave some time for Q&A. Knowing that there's a lot of content to cover, and there could be lots of questions, especially coming from the this community, which is going to be closely involved and engaged as we do this work. So this is not the only opportunity for you to ask questions. You can certainly reach out to me and my team. Even after the presentation, I'll be happy to actually respond to your questions. So let me just share the slides. Okay, can everybody see the slides? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So before I dive into the actual content, let me just give you a little bit of a context on what really is the purpose. Why are we actually moving towards a pan-Canadian roadmap? Some of you would have paid attention to the meeting that we had on the announcement on the 4 shared priorities. And then leading to those 4 shared priorities, the increased investment, that will be provided through the health transfer funding, from federal government to the provinces and territories. And those increased investments, the purpose is to basically invest that money into modernizing the healthcare system, through the standardized health data and digital tools. And the key purpose really there is to make sure that, we have a system which is connected care, a system which is data driven, and also unlock the data value, which is sitting into the various assets that we have to support, both from a clinical use perspective, but most importantly for the secondary use and research purposes. As part of that funding, 505 million was committed over the next 5 years for the PCHOs, number of the PCHO organizations, including InfoWay. And that money is supposed to be targeted at 4 key areas. Developing the new shared health indicators, the 8 shared indicators, that were released. Creating a center of excellence on the health worker data and planning, where the things like licensure and the national licensure, those planning and strategies will be developed. Advancing the digital health tools and an interoperability roadmap, the one that is highlighted, and I think that's going to be something that I'm going to cover in the next 20 minutes. And then finally, underpinning efforts, to use the health data to further improve our safety and quality of the care, and to make it available, for the better learning outcomes. So that was the key thing, and I think this group should be excited to hear and read, what's there in the last 2 bullet points. Is really, this investment needs to go into projects and initiatives, which focus on providing improved health data collection that could actually help in terms of the better performance from a health system perspective. And then agreeing to adopt common standards, common standards and policies across the various areas, whether it's data, whether it's technology, or it is in the space of trust. So those were the key items that were actually included in the discussion. I highlighted 2 shared health indicators, that came out as part of that announcement. These are the 2 out of the 8. The reason I picked these 2 is because these 2 are very closely aligned. In fact, they are directly mapped to all the work that you would see in the roadmap and the work that we're actually driving in support of our provincial, territorial, and federal partners. And those 2 indicators, one is increasing the percentage of Canadians who can access their comprehensive health record electronically, and then increasing the percentage of electronic information exchange that occur between the various healthcare providers, in the healthcare ecosystem across the various settings. And those are the 2 fundamental shared health indicators on which the increased funding and the effectiveness and the outcome of that funding will be monitored and measured. And it's important to actually provide that context before I dive into this. I don't think, this is a slide that this team, would have difficulty understanding. I usually use it for some of the non-standards audience. The left side provides the more of a technical, authentic view of what really is the interoperability and how do you actually really move up. And you actually need all the 4 layers to drive it. And the right side really provides, when we constantly talk to our stakeholders, i.e., whether it's a pharmacist or a specialist or a nurse, or a hospital administrator, understanding their view. They do understand interoperability, but they also understand interoperability really enables the exchange of information, exchange of data between the systems in a consistent manner, and be able to use the data for their purpose. So I don't think, this requires enough time for this group. So just diving into roadmap, what really is a roadmap? As the name implies, a roadmap is basically a compass or guide, as you all would know, spanning into 5 to 10 year, or even sometimes 10-year plus duration. And the focus is to really provide, where we're going, identifying the common national view, the common strategy, and the common direction, and then include, what are the components, that will be delivered as part of the roadmap. It doesn't necessarily dive into the details of how this will be delivered, because those usually come as part of the implementation and the project plans, which the jurisdictionals carry. When we looked at the roadmap, we looked at lots of international counterparts and what they are actually doing, within their jurisdiction. So on the left side of the screen, you see some snapshots, that we provided to give a reference, for example, what ONC is doing, in US. What is the Digital Health Agency in Australia doing? And there's New Zealand, then India, and then NHS England. They all have a standardized interoperability roadmap, and they all have taken a different approach. Now, mind you, each one of these jurisdictions or countries, they have a different health system. Some of them are, most of them are actually centralized, but there are some of them, which are decentralized, like us, where we often say we have 13 different health systems, a federated health system delivery model. Why did we need one? I think we have done lots of work in the last few years in terms of developing common EHR blueprints, or DIS blueprints, but we haven't really built a pan-Canadian view of what are some of the common initiatives that support both patient-centric as well as the provider-centric model to advance the connected care. So when we looked at the individual roadmaps across various provinces and territories, what we realized was the initiatives and the strategic goals are pretty common, are mostly common across all the jurisdictions. Their order of priority may be different, but they were pretty consistent in terms of the themes and the outcomes that they're trying to accomplish. So what we did is, we tried to actually identify those commonalities across all those initiatives and put that into the roadmap. And what we try to capture into our roadmap is the need for the common standards, the need for the common building blocks or the capabilities that are required irrespective of what use case you are developing. So for example, one of the jurisdiction may be developing electronic referral, another may be doing a patient summary, but the underlying capabilities are going to be pretty consistent and same. They would need a common data model. They would need a common reference architecture, that supports the access and exchange of electronic information in a safe, secure way. It requires, data matching and lookup capabilities. So that's what we try to do, identify commonalities in terms of the maturity building blocks. And this roadmap is not an info-based roadmap. This is all a shared pan-Canadian roadmap, and it actually supports and complements the individual roadmaps that the jurisdictions have. This is again reiterating a common vision, across all the provinces and territories. When you look at, keeping patient at the center, how do we actually advance these initiatives? And when we look at all of those roadmaps, including ourselves, the key themes that we extracted is, one is how to enable the access to health information for all Canadians, how to build a modernized health system which is based on connected care, and the information could be exchanged electronically in a standardized manner, in a near real-time manner. And finally, how do we actually build the health systems in a way that promotes innovation, where the data is available, for secondary use, the data is available for performance purpose, the data is available, for research purposes, and it supports the further innovation over the coming years. What we took when we wrote the roadmap, and we were pretty much on road shows and talking to every single jurisdiction, we realized that either a bottoms-up approach or a top-down approach on its own will not actually drive significant value. So what we tried to do is actually combine the best of both worlds, recognizing the need to have the foundational capability available in every single jurisdiction. How do we actually build those foundational capabilities, with a very patient-centric or a provider-centric, projects or initiatives, so that we can actually drive the implementation of those capabilities and also show some outcomes. So on the right side of the slide, you'll see the 4 key strategic goals, or I would actually call them 4 key problem areas that we identified, where we need to work on. And these are figuring out consistently across all the jurisdictions, easing the data blocking and portability, enabling the providers to get access across the fragmented sources of data from a patient standpoint at the point of care, enabling the patient access and defining the need on what do we mean by patient access, how should they access, what are the channels available to them, are there any standards, that they should be using to actually access their information, how do we actually move forward the access journey. And then the final one is really improving the care coordination and collaboration, which means, team-based care. When you do the transitions of care, how do you electronically transition, a patient's record or summary or care to the next setting, but also a constant, exchange or a constant communication, between the care providers in a multi-care setting to advance the care for the patient. So a number of things. So these are the 4 areas that were actually called out as the problem areas. Now, when we look at that, we and the middle layer talks about identifying the 4 near-term initiatives. Again, these are the initial set of initiatives. These initiatives alone do not solve all the problems, but they actually move the needle significantly, when it comes to what we're trying to achieve from an interoperability standpoint. So primary care data portability, initiative number 1, a number of problems in this area. How do one, I think identifying, using this project to identify a pan-Canadian health data framework or a pan-Canadian data model, or you want to call it a CA core, or you want to call it a equivalent of a US core data set of interoperability. So that is a big chunk of work that needs to be done as part of the first program. And then it will actually support, the unblocking of data, which could be intentional or unintentional. So we are going to target both sides of the thing, but mostly the unintentional blocking of the data, to make sure that, the vendor systems are equipped and compliant from a standards perspective, both on the data as well as the exchange side. Second initiative, which is well underway, IPS, patient summary. As I think most of you would already know, we already have a PSCA, pan-Canadian patient summary standard, and we have been running some of the conformance, with some of the vendors to make sure that they're enabled. 2 of the jurisdictions, would start their trial implementation this year, and hopefully other jurisdictions will come on board. So patient summary, it basically advances a well-defined container of what should be a clinical summary for a patient look like, and try to actually drive that consistency of definition of the data model, as well as the exchange of that information through FHIR API. So those are some of the foundational work being done there. Patient access to electronic health data, pretty big honking area, because today we use the provincial portal as an approach to access the data. But how do we actually enable our infrastructure within the PTs to support the Smart on FHIR applications, the Smart on FHIR standards, to basically, support the other channels, that would actually provide the consumers and the citizens, access to the data. But again, I think even our access is a one-way street right now. It's read-only access. how do we look at futuristically and see the patients, would also at some point need to actually contribute to their own data and manage their own data rather than, just accessing their record. And then the final piece is the e-referral and e-consult. There is some work, which is starting to actually gain traction across some of the jurisdictions. In this space, the referral management system or the referral management platform, which has multiple facets, of the definition of a standard e-referral, the definition of how the data should be exchanged, the definition of some of the underlying communication standards on how the information should be exchanged and auditable in a secure manner. So all of those things, fall in that particular area. But that place will also extend, if I start adding e-order to it, the capability to order electronic requisitions, for lab, all of those things, but so we need to actually standardize some of that work. So these are the initial 4, I would say, projects or initiatives that are going to help drive the project, but most importantly, the building blocks, which is the final layer on this slide. Those 12 building blocks pretty much span across, 3 categories. Category 1 being the data, the common data model, which we talked about, a consistent data model, a consistent pan-Canadian data framework, and the data matching capability. So that falls in the data. The second component of that block is going to be around the reference architecture or the technology. Capabilities around the information exchange protocols, the capabilities around the directory and the resource locations, the capabilities around what should be the architecture to actually support the access and exchange of information. So to me, that is like a blueprint, similar to the blueprint, that we had published many years back in the EHR space, but we called out the building blocks of that architecture. And the third category for those building blocks is going to be primarily around the trust framework, how the consent and the policy be represented within the solution. How should we actually have the common data sharing, requirements and the solutions and the framework identified and built into the solution. So those are some of the things, that we will be looking at in terms of building. I would call them, some of them would come out as work products. Some of them will come across as individual designs and ideal states that we will collaboratively co-create with the jurisdictions, because they all have identified the needs. Now, every single jurisdiction, may be at a different maturity level when it comes to these building blocks. But in the end, I think it is going to benefit every single jurisdiction that wishes to thrive when it comes to the data access and data exchange. I already covered these 4 goals, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Covered these 4 initiatives at length in the previous slide. I think these are the 4 blocks that I mentioned, across the 3 categories: the foundational data work, the access and exchange, i.e. architecture work, and the third will be the trust framework. So these are the 3 areas where we will be actually working, and I call them 3 core frameworks within which, a number of capabilities are actually built in. And we are going to work very closely with the provinces and territories to build local implementation plans as they have and align to their implementation plan. Depending on the priorities, some jurisdictions may advance some of the capabilities compared to others, but that is more of a planning and an implementation process. High level from I think it's good to actually provide an indication to the market, indication to our stakeholders that what's going to happen across the 4 initiatives that I mentioned. So you see on the vertical bar left, the 4 initiatives: the patient summary, data portability, patient access, and e-referral. And then we're trying to actually map at a very, very high level what are some of the deliverables, we will be, the team will be delivering or co-creating along with our province and territorial partners yearly over the next 5 years. Now, this is something, that needs to be aligned. As I mentioned, it needs to have a linkage into the jurisdictional implementation plan to make it a lot more effective and useful. But what you start to see is, there is a pan-Canadian approach, at least for these 4 program areas. And it's not just about standards, it is about, it goes beyond the standards, it brings change management approach together, why is adoption of patient summary, difficult in some of the jurisdictions. So taking a common approach, to invest time and effort in the adoption of patient summary, because that's a uniform across all the provinces and territories. The need for some of the regulations and legislation, it is not just specific to a particular jurisdiction, it is actually a pan-Canadian issue. So we try to actually create that table to actually drive some of these pan-Canadian approaches to these things, in addition to the standard work, adoption and the approval of the standard work. From an outcomes perspective, where we're looking at the first couple of years are going to be a lot of foundational year and a lot of heavy lifting needs to be done in terms of developing the content, developing the work products and everything. Starting year 3 onwards, we would like to start seeing some of the implementation outcomes or impact getting realized, and we'll start to see some of the numbers, in terms of access and exchange of information. And as we move forward, eventually, I think in addition to the patient safety, the clinician, effectiveness, the patient comfort, the patient satisfaction, you also start to see quantifiable benefits, in 5 years, less burden on the health system, savings, in terms of times of Canadians and clinicians, who often spend 30 to 40 minutes every day, looking for information manually, for the data which is outside their practices. Now, these are indicative outcomes, and there are a couple of assumptions, that the provinces and territories will be able to move forward at the same pace as we're saying, and they're able to actually invest and advance these projects, as we have outlined into this. And we're working very closely, with their performance measurement team to make sure that, we put a little bit of a performance and an outcome-based project and program, so that, we all can actually drive it together. As I mentioned, it is not just about the technology and the standards alone. There are a number of other key success factors, attached to this work that we do. Adequate funding, I think, which we already at the start I mentioned, they've got enough funding, from the federal partners. Legislative assessment and change, as I mentioned, the top layer of interoperability metrics, if you really see, is really about the organizational change, organizational interoperability, which requires, the legal, the legislative, and some of the data sharing needs. Governance, we have set up the initial pan-Canadian governance, and we plan to actually expand it to bring number of advisory groups into the mix, including this community. Vendor mobilization, aligning the vendors on common approaches, bringing them together, putting together a common conformance approach for the 4 identified areas. So that is something, which is a key part of the success. Change management, I talked about common approaches and strategies to advance change, management of the standards that are being developed, policy, privacy, and security, building those key requirements, identifying those requirements upfront, i.e. Consent management, as an example. How do we actually define those requirements upfront? Because each one of the priority area really talks about, accessing the information and ability to exchange the information. So identification of the data governance within this, the data stewardship, those kind of roles are extremely important. And then the national procurement, identifying clear requirements and publishing clear requirements, so that the new solution providers could actually see what is the expectation in terms of the standards. That's part of the national procurement. And finally, NRC, which has been an ongoing, operational center for us, where we release these terminology releases from time to time. So those are some of the success factors, as we advance this journey. Again, this is a collaborative journey. This is not an Infoway alone journey, and I don't think I can claim that Infoway alone can actually drive this thing forward. So there never has been a better climate, to advance this work. There's never been a better climate where there is such a strong understanding of interoperability and the need to address interoperability with means beyond just the technology and the standards, but also bringing other things to the mix as well. So that was the last slide. In terms of next steps, we will be aligning this roadmap with the local provinces and territories implementation plan, because we do want to see the outcomes there. Sharing the roadmap with the private sector. We will actually start making the roadmap. It's a 100-page document, pretty open and public to private sector, but to everyone. Private sector primarily because it'll start to actually guide their individual product roadmaps. And then developing the market guidance, for them to actually move forward. And then eventually we're going to actually, by end of Q1 this year, we will publish a fairly robust 12 to 24 month milestone plan, which is supported by the jurisdiction, and we'll move forward with that. So that was the last slide. I wanted to make sure that I leave enough room for Q&A. I did see during the presentation there was a hand raised. I'm going to stop sharing and go into a Q&A mode. Okay, go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, Abby, the slides all say confidential, do not distribute. Are we, this is a pretty public forum, are we able to take these back to our teams as we're working in the jurisdictions and share it with our teams?
Yes, you're right. I think, I mean, our roadmap, I must say, this is a slightly older version. I haven't cleaned that up because we were still waiting for the formal approval. The roadmap was actually approved at the March 30th Confederation of Deputy Ministers meeting. So I am totally okay, if you want to further share within your teams.
Abby,
yeah.
If you can provide a link to the roadmap that was approved, I can, when I post the recording, I can put that in the forum post as well.
If you could post a version without that on, because I mean, if we're sharing with our teams, we're all expected to respect those kinds of things. And so it looks bad if we, send our boss a slide deck that says do not distribute.
No, totally okay. I think we haven't actually cleaned up those versions, as I said. So I mean, if you can wait a bit, then we'll actually create that, correct this, and along with it, we'll provide the Word document as well. Okay. Question from sorry. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to ask a more specific question about content, but I see Finney might have gotten in first. When we're looking at the reference architecture, and you're talking about using the reference architecture, as a common foundation, much like we used the blueprint in the past, the reference architecture presentations I've attended to, the reference architecture itself right now has been developed really focused with the IPS exchange on it. It doesn't seem to have been looked at as a broader architecture. And are we going to address making that more generalizable before we start saying that this is what should be applied everywhere?
Great question, Lauren. Yes. So again, a little bit of a background on that. We started IPS 18 months back, and we hadn't actually started working on the detailed roadmap, until last year. So it's just a matter of order, but absolutely the goal is to build an all-encompassing reference architecture, which not only actually addresses the IPS related data access and exchange, but also other use cases as well. So that's exactly the plan. Okay. And I'm reading Finney's question, which is around articulate a little more what is being envisioned as regards to vendor mobilization. Yeah. So there are a couple of things which we are actually taking into consideration for vendor mobilization. One really is building a vendor engagement or a vendor governance forum and bringing them early in as we are actually developing some of these standards, whether it's the e-referral, whether it's around patient access, or even the patient summary. If you see some of the events that we had in the last 2 years, like Projectathon, it was an intent to actually mobilize the vendors, bring them together, and basically demonstrate that, yes, what they've been asking for is something that we're actually responding to. What they've asked over the last several years is, Infoway, can you actually bring all the jurisdictions together? Can you actually build common pan-Canadian standards instead of 13 different, development requests? So that stream will actually focus on that. We're trying to actually secure endorsement from all the jurisdictions for conforming the vendors on the 4 priority areas on their behalf. So Infoway, think of it, Infoway running testing, i.e. conformance, i.e. common projectathons on behalf of all the jurisdictions for the 4 common areas. So to me, that is vendor mobilization, bringing them together to do it. But also in cases of some difficult areas, where, for example, EMR data portability, the data blocking, what is happening there? I think, as I mentioned, there are 2 areas to it, intentional and unintentional. So what is happening there, and bringing some of those conversations, the issues around their business models around it. So bringing those discussions forward and actually articulating that, because we have now the liberty of the Pan-Canadian Executive Governance Table, which is well represented by the delivery leaders and the delivery sponsors from each of the jurisdictions. So number of things happening within the vendor mobilization. Yep. Does that answer your question, Finney?
Thanks, Avi. Yeah.
Yeah. I have another one from Mukesh. Think of the position, what will be the potential approach to come through the critical success factor while working with each jurisdiction? Yeah, so I think I would say that we've already overcome one of the major hurdle, which is bringing all the jurisdictions together. We have a common Pan-Canadian table where all of them are present. This is the roadmap that is built based on the feedback coming from them. So they all have actually supported advancing these 4 areas. There are priorities for each of these 4 areas, maybe somewhat different in a different order, but they're all actually have demonstrated their commitment to work with us. So I think that's a great sign, Mukesh, because I would have been worried if this roadmap was developed in silos or in isolation. But what gives me confidence is this is their roadmap. We happen to be the facilitator and the convener in this space, and we're actually doing it on their behalf. So to me, that is a critical success factor. Now, there are other things, with respect to the fundings, always with these type of things, funding is a big question. So they're receiving direct funding, from the PPs and from federal, and the outcomes, those bilateral agreements are going to be based on the outcomes that they will commit to. And we are going to beef up our advisory team, the SME team, the support team, the technical team that will actually put pen to paper and do most of the heavy lifting as we co-create these artifacts. So that's one. Does that answer your question, Mukesh?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Avi. So that is what I was looking for, and you added that funding because that was my other question for you, but you made it clear. So in what you means is your visioning, what you're looking means where could be the potential challenges you might have, although you mentioned you already have an endorsement from all the jurisdictions. So you still be seeing some challenges or will be there while implementing this huge project or initiative, you can call it?
Yeah, I think there are always some practical challenges. I don't think there will be any deliberate issues, but there will be some practical challenges because these are, and I'll just take one example, the shortage of talent, ability to actually even hire the right resources. Every single jurisdiction is trying to actually hire people to advance these projects. We're also trying to do the same thing. So I think that's one of the practical challenge. But I think from an intent standpoint, I have not seen, and that's why I keep on saying this is probably one of the best climates I've seen, where I see a common voice when it comes to advances this work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
There's notes here from Paul. I might want to address that one, but I do want to save a little bit of time. Apparently, we have an update on CA Core from Joel and Christine. So if we can save a little bit of time for that, Abby.
Yeah, and you jumped over Kelly, Ron.
Yes, okay, possible, yeah.
Yeah, I see Kelly, Paul, then Jennifer.
Yeah, okay, and then let's wrap that and we'll move on to our other subject. Thank you.
Yeah, so wondering how we might incentivize vendors in this market right now. Data is seen as a competitive advantage. If it disincentivize data, can we disincentivize exchange transactions or something like that? Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things built into this one. One is, from a data stewardship and an ownership standpoint, who really owns the data, right? So I think that's fundamental thing, that needs to start to becoming clearer in the marketplace. Second is from an incentive standpoint, I think we are, as part of our vendor mobilization framework that we're building, we're really collecting, from all the jurisdictions, how could we actually bring them together and see and look at a potential way to not incentivize but support this work, and then understand from the vendors, what are the impeding business models, what is the business model, in the case of the e-referral, when the transaction go from one vendor to other vendor, what is going to be the need for the business model when IPS gets implemented, patient summary is created in one EMR system and it's exchanged with other EMR systems. So those are the things, we're trying to actually understand, and which is why, we're bringing vendor to the table. So instead of actually directly jumping to the conclusion to say, oh, yes, we should incentivize the exchange transactions, I think the role of who is generating the transaction, who is fulfilling the transaction, those things are going to be very important to understand. And we do have some international reference available in this place, the things, how it's working, in European marketplace, how it's working in ONC. So the purpose is to actually bring that to the table and have that clarity. So again, I think, can I answer saying that, yes, we're going to incentivize exchange transactions? No, I don't have that answer today. I mean, Info is not going to incentivize the vendors. I mean, it's the local jurisdiction. So the purpose is that we have the table, we bring them together, we put this fundamental question on the table, and we actually come with a recommendation. So that's where we'll be moving, Kelly. Paul, is this a roadmap to develop the standards then deploy, or just for deployment, as it sounds as though some of these standards have already been determined by a portion of the community, not the whole community? Yeah, Paul, you're right. I mean, as I said, this roadmap is a start. We picked, we picked 4 initial set of use cases. And you're right, in some cases standards is available. For example, IPS, it's a cross SDO collaboration standard, that was actually built by HL7. So we're advancing IPS here. But the other standards, we will develop. So for example, for the EMR data blocking and EMR data portability, when the data needs to move from one EMR to other EMR, I don't think, there's any national standard available there. So how do we actually, to me, that is a specification. What is a standard specification to migrate the data from one EMR, which is not just the clinical data, but even, for example, a booking data, a billing data, all of that, how do we actually do that, right? So those are the things we'll look at. And again, mind you, these are not the exhaustive list of use cases. Things will come in. So as an example, tomorrow there may be a need for a national e-booking standard, right? So those things, will be determined at the executive table from a needs standpoint, and then we'll look at it. I'm trying to quickly go through the number of questions, recognizing that I do need to leave 15 minutes, for the final presentation. Okay.
I'll make a note of any additional questions and send them to you by email.
Yeah, so maybe we should do so Jennifer, Alex, and Thomas. I think we have 3 questions. If we can actually, let me just see if I can quickly wrap that up. So regarding patient consent for sharing, is consent for authorized secondary user data for the Q1 and contribution to the primary system and then social license sense. Yes, Jennifer, I don't know, I mean, if this was a question or you're trying to actually clarify the purpose of data collection for secondary use. I think this to me seems like a more of a statement. And yes, that is a desired state where we want to actually get to from the collection and usage of data for secondary purpose. Yes. Provider seems to hesitate sharing some information they feel of importance, but they keep within their record, only call this up. Yeah, and I think I already called it, the blocking. So Alex, from a blocking standpoint, it has 2 facets to it, across all the geographies that you look at, intentional and unintentional. Unintentional means, their system is just not capable. They don't have a common data standard. They don't have system compatible, to FHIR APIs. I mean, if you make a FHIR API call to actually get data from a system, the system is just not compliant enough or capable enough to actually give you that information. So we're trying to actually address from an unintentional standpoint as well, but also from an intentional standpoint, where some of the jurisdictions are trying to come up with the legislations where they are actually regulating the exchange of information and regulating the unblocking of the data. So both of these are there. There is a policy table that we are going to work with as part of this pan-Canadian work. And that is something that we have all recognized that legislation is an important lever in terms of advancing this in addition to the work. So I'll just take the final one, Thomas, which is, do we have a shareable organization chart of the governance structure for the IO roadmap? Yes, I think there is an initial structure available. We have set up the executive council table, which includes all the jurisdictions and the ADMs. We also have a coordinating table, and we are organically now adding more pieces to it. For example, this community will be represented in one of the advisory group. There will be a clinician working group. So we are getting there, but the initial view of the governance can be made available if you want to actually review it, and we have proper terms of reference and everything. So we can do that. I think I'm going to stop there. Yeah, I think
I've made a note of Dan's question, and we can provide an answer in the forum if that works.
okay. That was a pretty fast, session. I tried to answer as many questions as I could. Hopefully that was useful. As I said, I mean, if you do have further questions, after the session, please feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to address those.
Yeah, and Abhi, just to state that I think this community will be very interested over time, particularly those that are as you'd identified, already sort of aware of and engaged with this kind of activity. There may be an opportunity for you here as things evolve to float ideas or to solicit comment and feedback that this community would be very happy to do. All right,
Ron,
thanks.
if you can make Joel a co-host.
I can do that. 1 second.
Got some slides to share.
Joel.
Yeah, so hi all. Abhi, thanks for taking us through that map. And actually, this is a great segue for us to delve into goal 2, which is easing data blocking and portability. The CIHI team and I would like to talk more about the CA Core Plus, because that word has been circulating for quite a while, and people have been actually asking us, what is the CA Core Plus? So Christine and myself would like to share a little bit of context and give people more information about that. Joni, let me know when I can share my slides.
You are a co-host now.
Okay. So once again, I am Joel Francis. I am part of the InfoWay Standards team, and I will be sharing along with Christine, who I will let her introduce herself. Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine McKenzie. I'm a program consultant with CIHI, and I work within the primary healthcare team.
Okay, so I'm just going to hit the share button. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
All right, we can see it, Joel.
Yes.
Is
okay.
Presentation
mode, you're going to run that?
Yeah.
Be easier to see.
And you're also in a protected view.
I can't really see the protected view, Joni, but can everyone see the slides at the very least?
Yeah, Joel, we can see the slides, but you're on the last slide, so you may want to.
It shows on my end that I'm on the first slide, but
yeah, you're not in presentation mode yet, and you're at the last slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got presentation mode up, Joel. You just got to find that and share that instead of the actual source slides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes me crazy every time I do this.
Yeah, it's maybe if I go here.
Maybe in the meantime, while Joel is, there we go. Joel, that's perfect, Joel.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Success.
So we can keep it on this slide. In the meantime, I just want to mention to folks, I'm staring at my larger monitor, which does not have a camera. So I'm not looking directly at you. I'm looking at the slides because I have a better view. And also my laptop was damaged in travel over the weekend from Toronto on my way to Toronto for some work that we were doing. And we lost a presentation. But one of the reasons I'm here is actually to talk about how CIHI is collaborating with InfoWay to support the roadmap that InfoWay has laid out. And specifically, the block that I'm supporting in this piece of work is on the data access and portability block. We can't see the slides yet.
Yeah, Christine, just give me 1 second. This thing is acting a little bit funny.
And maybe I'll mention for those on the call, CIHI is also supporting the governance work with InfoWay. So the structure that Abby was talking about earlier, that's another area that CIHI is in direct support with. But today we're just going to focus on this part of the roadmap. So I'm introducing CIHI's portion in collaboration with Joel. Maybe if you go back, Joel, just to the first screen. CIHI is developing a pan-Canadian health data content framework, which is going to be feeding the CA core. And I'll get more into the details now. This is a very high level presentation. We're not going to go into much detail today, but it's just to kind of give you some background information about what's been happening behind the scenes and how we're collaborating with InfoWay on this work. Okay, Joel, you can go to the next slide. So there are two streams that are happening in parallel. So one of the streams is that CIHI is developing a pan-Canadian health data content standard, starting with primary healthcare. And this standard is going to be from a person-centric information needs perspective. And it will include information on clinical care and services, clinical and organization operations, as well as health system planning, public and population health. The other stream that's happening in parallel is a pan-Canadian data content model. So this is going to be several models that will be converging towards the end with the data content standard. Right now, this work is happening in parallel. It is feeding each other. And it's meant to model real-world concepts that are important to a person's health. And it will also be agnostic of technology and person-centric. So if you go to the next slide, if you look at these two streams of activities, what happens is that they converge together to actually form 7 cohesive deliverables. And this is what we're calling the Pan-Canadian Health Data Framework. So as we mentioned, we have the data standards work that's happening, which is going to be defining the data elements, value sets, and the descriptions. We have a business context model, which is defining the scope and all of the information and details of those who interact with it. We have the information model, which is our highest level model. So this depicts the information from a subject area and entity level at the highest level that is important to a person's health. And then we start to blow this out into a conceptual model. So that conceptual model is mid-level. And it basically looks at all the different entities that are found within the data standard that are important to a person's health, and continues to blow out into a logical data model, which then gets to that more detailed level that has those relationships between those entities in the data itself and the value sets and the cardinality. And to support each of these models, we'll have a business glossary, which then again is a subset of that data standard that we were talking about. And then we'll have more robust plain language definitions, and we'll start to pinpoint where we have commonalities across the different domains. And then we have, again, to support the framework, we have the metadata about all of the data models. So all of these products together will form one product, which is what we're calling the Pan-Canadian Health Data Content Framework. And if you go to the next slide.
Okay.
Joel, just before we get into this, I'm just going to explain the framework side.
Sure.
And this is just to show what we are working together, or we're working towards together as a team. So CIHI and InfoWay have been collaborating quite closely for over a year on this work and thinking through what this needs to look like and how we're going to be able to inform different parts of the data exchange that will then form the CA core. So here's just a very high level visual of what I've just explained. And that framework really goes into defining those common data elements across 2 or more domains. And then starting with primary healthcare, start to include the domain-specific elements that are part of this framework. And then, Joel, if you'd like to talk about how this then feeds into the CA Core Plus.
Sure, thank you. One of the key things is the logical model that is going to come out from the PHCDCF. I'm going to call it that because it's a mouthful to say. And from this logical model, we will aim to create a set of FHIR exchange profiles. And I'm going to set that as the tone here, but I'm going to formally define the CA Core Plus, and we will get a sense of why we call it CA Core with the plus. So the CA Core is a use case driven data exchange specification, which includes a set of FHIR profiles derived, again, off the logical model. And it will be governed by the Canadian Interoperability Data Governance Council. And the CA Core Plus will serve as the foundation for implementers to create a set of APIs which are person-centric, so that they can create a care ecosystem that ties back to Canada's roadmap. Okay, so we will start off with the primary health care use case, as you can see here on the left. And those will have a set of data categories and elements that will be transformed into what we call, and we all want, is the FHIR profile. We will grow the CA Core by adding different use cases, as you can see again on the left: long-term care, acute and ambulatory care. And once we reach a certain point where we have enough use cases, we will then create a layer of abstraction. So the CA Core, so we'll find all the common elements between those use cases and create that layer of abstraction, which will, again, so either that can be the starting point from which you can create FHIR profiles, or you can go into the more domain-specific profiles if you wish. At the same time, we will leverage all the work that is done by national guides such as the CA baseline to actually create the design points and to leverage the learnings from those national guides to influence these FHIR profiles. And I will stop there so that we have some time for Q&A. But Christine, if you have anything to add or chime in, please feel free to go ahead.
No, nothing to add here. Thanks, Joel.
Ken has a question in the chat.
Joni, I have my deck open and I cannot see the chat. Do you mind
Sure.
reading the questions out for us? Thank you so much.
If the data exchange is use case driven, does that mean that there will be different FHIR profiles for primary healthcare versus acute versus LTC versus others, each being different use cases? Does that mean we won't have a common data exchange until all the domains are finalized?
Yes, that is in some sense right, Ken. Those who are interested in using the primary healthcare profiles can certainly go ahead. One thing to note here is that because we will be aligning to the baseline, any implementer might have to look at either choosing what is in the core at its current state, or actually leveraging the baseline, which is use caseless and actually covers a more broader sense. So it will be up to them to choose as we grow the core.
And then Paul Knapp asks, so are the abstract profiles or the implementation profiles the content of core? Okay, so
Sorry.
are the abstract profiles or the implementation profiles the content of core?
Both, I would say. So that layer which finds the common the common points between the domain specific profiles, which will create that top layer, as well as the domain specific profiles. That's why we call it the CA Core Plus. Unlike the US, which was use case agnostic, right? And they didn't have any they didn't use a use case as their starting point. This is why we call it the CA Core Plus, because it's much more than just that starting layer.
And then Lorraine asks, do you expect that the CA baseline work will cease and fold into core or continue?
The CA baseline work is not going to go away soon. The main reason for that is, as you can see, we're starting off with the use case. The CA Core Plus cannot cover everything. So implementers at a given point in time will have to decide whether to use the CA Core Plus or the baseline. But the fact that we're going to align with the baseline should make it easier for them to move over should they choose the baseline as a starting point. And up until the CA point grows to a level where it will just contain everything, and folks can just start from there.
And then Paul says, so Core Plus is everything developed to date. Suggest dropping the term core.
Yeah, so there has been a lot of talk about the word core, and the word core is kind of, yeah, it's a bit tricky to use the word core here, but we're mainly using it in a sense to similar to what the US has done and what the UK have done, is that they're starting off with a common set of profiles, and that's why we opted to keep the word core for now. Yeah.
And then Lorraine says, we are already seeing challenges with aligning with the baseline versus core.
Yeah, if I could maybe elaborate on that by voice quickly.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. For instance, we've had a conversation in the jurisdiction that I'm working in, because the patient summary CA Core patient profile is different than the baseline patient profile for reasons that make sense for the use case that patient summary is implementing. But we've got other implementation guides that are based off of the baseline. And then we're getting questions about, how to manage differences between the two. So that's, having the two streams is already, without some direction, is already creating challenges about what people are supposed to implement.
Right. That's a great question. So I think the way to approach this is that once we have this CA Core Plus, I suspect that many of the national specifications will have to be rewritten in some sense and have to derive from this core. Again, it's up to the implementer at that point in time whether to actually decide if the CA Core Plus has enough in it that they can take it on at that point in time, or leverage the baseline.
Well, and sometimes the CA, the core in this case, is more restrictive because it makes sense for that use case.
Yeah.
But that isn't necessarily appropriate for a more general use case.
Right. Which is why we have the CA Core Plus, which is creating that top layer, which is not so constraining, and then going more domain specific, which is tightening of those profiles a little bit to suit that domain.
So we're over time, but we have 4 more questions in the chat. What I suggest is I'll send those questions to you, Joel, and you can do a forum post answering them.
Sure. Yeah, if we can take down the questions, Joni, that would be helpful, and Christine and I can take a look at them and make sure people get answers to their questions.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Joel, and thanks,
Thank you.
Christine. And a lot. That was a packed hour. So, all right. So thanks very much for joining. I hope you got something from it. And certainly it's just a start of further conversations, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, don't close the call yet, Ron, because we still have questions coming in.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly.
Trying to get the names associated with the questions as well.
Exactly. I can copy the chat, just record the chat comments as a whole.
I'm going to stop the recording.